Good day, everyone. Welcome to Virtual Concert Halls, broadcasting today live from Vienna, Virginia. Our online broadcasting platform is dedicated to streaming live performances and panel discussions. We connect musicians with their audiences and with each other. We are an independent virtual stage for classical musicians, educators of all instruments and music-related disciplines, for music promoters, supporters, and music lovers. Our guests join our programs from their own locations around the world. They bring and share their musical gifts, their expertise, their personalities, their dreams. We present our guests' opinions, and we hope that our audience will benefit from hearing different and maybe sometimes conflicting points of view on classical music, music aesthetics, music business, and other topics which we raise throughout our programs. Welcome to Virtual Concert Halls. Today we are presenting our next episode of Music Works, the series of programs created in collaboration with Polyphony Arts, music management and educational company based in the United Kingdom. Polyphony Arts invites leaders of the music and arts and educational industry to join for discussions on most pressing issues and topics of today. The author of the series, Katie Beardsworth, holds discussions about future of the performing arts, music education, music business, with people who are progressing the industry forward.
Hello and welcome to Music Works, a podcast by Polyphony Arts. We're talking about the future of the classical music industry with some great guests. Thank you for joining us. Hello and welcome to Music Works, a podcast by Polyphony Arts. Today I'm talking to Fraser Gordon. Hello, Fraser.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to tell us a bit about what you do?
My name is Fraser Gordon, and I am the contrabassoonist with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. I do a lot of education work with the orchestra and with other musical groups. I'm the bassoonist for the new London Chamber Ensemble, which is a wind quintet. And I do a lot of tutoring and examining. I teach at the Royal Academy of Music and make a lot of reads. So if you're watching, you could see a lot of I'm sort of sitting at my reed desk. If you're not watching and you're listening, there's an awful lot of paraphernalia to do with contrabassoons and bassoons that looks a bit complicated sitting over one of my shoulders, but you don't have to worry about that too much.
Thank you. I think that COVID has shaken things up a bit and shown the holes that I think that many of us knew were there, but they've been really kind of brought to the forefront. So I'm trying to have conversations with people about how that is for them and what they think about that. I don't know, does that sort of ring any bells in terms of things you
Yes, of course. I mean, it does. We've all got an awful lot to say about what's going on right now, and whether we think that how it's going to change will be for the better or for the worse in the long run. I mean, obviously, we're all hoping it's going to be for the better.
If like this may be a bit of an immediate place to dive in, but if like you could think of one thing that could change for the better as a result of what we've all been through over the last few months, what would it be?
One thing that could change for the better in general classical music, I think well, it has to be the big one. It has to be funding. It has to be that. It has to be I think more sort of solid, apart from just the basic more money, which is kind of the obvious one, but perhaps this the spread of it needs to be more even, so that the losses are not weighted in any particular part of the classical music sector. Um,
Yeah,
that it's a
absolutely.
funding is a massive issue. I mean, the other thing is it's whether that funding comes centrally, or whether the classical music sort of industry adapts in order to welcome more philanthropy. Maybe that's a way. Maybe that's a halfway house. Maybe that's something that we need to embrace more or encourage more, because of course no. Sorry, I'm giving a full answer here. Will I
No,
stop?
no, no, that's fine. No, I'm immediately thinking of like a million tangents. So
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good.
I'm biting my tongue.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good.
No, that's great. That's fine. Yeah, no, I think. Sorry, did you have more you wanted to say about it?
No, I just think that the philanthropy thing is, I mean, that's obviously that's how the American art works, and it's not that we necessarily want to go fully down that road, but it can take a long time to encourage people that have money to invest it where they trust it to be invested in the arts, and I think the arts could do with a lot more of that. There are some institutions that have it up and running, but essentially I think the balance between that and the reliance on the sort of central government funding, um, maybe the alteration of that, maybe that's the key to the survival of the arts, or not even the survival of the arts, the continuation. Maybe that's off the top of my head.
It's definitely a lot about money, isn't there, in the arts? I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, obviously, because I run music organisations that I seek funding for, and then seek work for musicians as well. And I think there's two sides to it. One is that I think music in some ways isn't businesslike enough and doesn't look enough at what its audiences actually want. And I feel as though my experience of the funding world in terms of grant funding is that it is going more that way, in the sense that funders, I believe, are looking at, or have been advised, are looking at funding applications and saying, well, if you don't have a sustainable business model in the first place, then we can't really give you any money, because, essentially you're not actually providing what your audience wants, and they're not proving they want it by coming and buying tickets or supporting you in other ways and so on. And I know that to do good grant funding applications, you have to have proof in various forms of why what you're doing is wanted and why it's useful and so on. But on the other hand, I don't know, that then involves us knowing an awful lot about audiences. I think that audiences are being put under a lot of pressure at the moment, because I'm aware of lots and lots of organisations that aren't able to produce their usual output,
Yeah,
asking people to help tide them over. And there's a lot of goodwill in this industry,
of
and it's
course.
working for some people, but I have really quite grave concerns about for example, music clubs, music organisations repeatedly asking their donors to pay for something when they're not providing a service or much of a service in return. Because
Yeah,
ultimately, I don't know, I don't think things are going to go back to exactly how they were before, and I think that organisations have to be shifting.
yeah.
So there's a huge amount of change there, isn't there, with like audience preferences may change as well,
Yes,
and we're only just getting back into live music, aren't we? So
yes. I think that
yeah.
what the odd is, that's. I mean, so I used to sit on the board of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, of which I'm a member, and that the sort of funding, the sort of funding model is only about 10% grant over of the overall profit, which really means that the orchestra has to listen to what the audiences want, and that is a very long term situation. That kind of thing, so you try a new concert with new repertoire in it, and if it's a real success, you do the same next year, But there's 12 months between that concert and the next concert. You can't roll out those concerts every month just in case they're going to be a disaster. So that's really, really difficult, because most companies or institutions or individuals in the arts will have to work so far ahead of themselves. It's really difficult to sort of to have the guts to invest the time and the effort and the money in those kinds of concerts, and when you're absolutely not sure whether they're going to work out for you or not. And the other thing about what audiences want, one of my big things in this is I think that sometimes the audience don't know what they want. I think
I agree.
that's important for everybody to have a little think about, and how we might try and go around circumnavigating that issue. And I personally think it's about educating audiences. Now, there will be a certain amount of people that just want to come along and hear a Symphony A by composer B. Then that's absolutely fine, because I'm sometimes like that, myself. Obviously I'm talking specifically about the orchestral world here because it's the world that's closest to me. However, there is a way of sort of introducing audiences to music that they don't know, that I think there needs to be slightly more well thought through than just programming it and saying and leaving it. So whether that means somebody has to stand up in front of an orchestra and actually talk about it, and talk about why this piece has been chosen and why you might not like it, and if you don't like it, that's okay. But what you might draw from it is this, and music is all about the interpretation of how you're feeling when you're hearing it. So anger might be something that the music might make you angry, or it's not necessarily going to make you sort of sit back and relax all the time. And I'm not just talking about contemporary music, I'm talking about any kind of music that the people in the concert hall have not heard before. But I think sometimes slamming a new piece in an audience's face with no background whatsoever is really, I remember hearing some Ravel for the first time as a school kid, and I hated it. I thought it was awful, really weird, and I couldn't get to grips with it at all. So that kind of thing is what I mean. It's difficult unless you have a bit of background, and perhaps, I don't know. There are different ways of doing that. Some orchestras and or education departments of orchestras and musical institutions have introduced getting to know, getting inside a piece of music, whether it's, a sort of lecture recital idea, which is, enlarged onto a concert hall stage. This is not a new idea. That I'm not just plucking this out of the top of my head. It's been done before, and I think the problem with that is, if you put that kind of thing on, it's a long-term project in which you need to sort of slowly build up the trust of the people that are buying the tickets, and it needs investment. It needs somebody behind it to support the orchestra, because it won't initially be a profit-making sort of idea. It'll take a while. I don't know. It'll take probably years before that's a profit-making idea. So a lot of people won't want to invest in it. I don't think, but I think that's the whole. I think that's the future. I think that's I do a lot of education in my role in the orchestra as a sort of side to the performance, and I'm very sort of enthusiastic about educating with children, whether it be in mainstream schools or special educational needs schools. But I think actually what I'm really talking about here is educating adults. And some people don't want to be educated. I've said that before. Some people just want to come and hear their symphony number A that they love, and that's the only symphony they'll listen to. But I think educating adults, sitting some people down and telling them about the music, and giving them and inviting them to sort of listen in an active way about a piece of music that they don't know, I think that's what I do. That I would do if I were in charge of all the orchestras of the world.
Well, I agree completely, and I think that I think the phrase like educating people has a certain connotation to it about feeling like you need to sit in a classroom and learn things, but actually there are lots of ways of educating people
Yeah.
and lots of ways of sharing. I often feel that, especially with the chamber music club that I run, my main aim with audience development is just to get people through the door once, because I believe that if people get through the door once, they then learn why it's great and why they want to keep coming back. And if they don't, then that's fine. And it's not, everything is not for everyone.
Yeah.
But I believe there's a sort of disconnect between the impression that classical music gives as a sort of genre almost, or all the stuff that comes with it. It's relatively niche. It has all the you'd be so aware, anyone that's listening would be so aware of the stigma attached to going to concerts and worrying about what you're going to wear and whether you're going to clap in the right places and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and even if I may interrupt you there, there are a lot of people within our classical music world that think that all that chat is absolute nonsense and absolute
Totally,
drivel.
yeah.
And so to someone like me, I mean, I've heard all of that before, and and that's so it's not. It's up to us within the classical musical world to be a little bit careful about how we approach that information when we're presented with it, and to make sure that we always remember that there will be somebody in that hall that has never heard the New World Symphony before, and whose first time listening to that piece. And that happened to me once when I invited a student along to one of our concerts, and he'd never heard Doors at Nine, and he was just really captured by not just the music, but because he'd heard a recording of it, but he was captured by the atmosphere in the hall and the live music happening in front of him. So I think that our approach from within the business, as I'm only agreeing with you really here, needs to be very careful, that we don't forget too quickly that all this information about coming to a concert for the first time and wearing to clap or whatever, that it does get tired. It gets tired to us from our point of view to hearing all of that, but we need to be careful that we don't, as I said, get sort of too angry about it, because we still need to keep people feeling like they're welcome. That's what I mean.
I agree, but there's something nice about seeing things with fresh eyes as well, isn't there? And there's a slight, it isn't exactly what you were just talking about, but I'm always struck by the way, I think there's an assumption in classical music that a lot of enjoyment of it is to do with knowledge. And while I don't disagree at all about what you've said about adding context and explanation and a kind of sense of why this is great in a concert experience, particularly when you see performers or conductors talking about the music they're performing, there's something particularly engaging about that when they can tell you exactly why this is so great for them. But my husband is not a particular classical music fan. He does like it because I like it, but he never was before we were together. And if we go to a really, really incredible concert together, the fact that it was a really, really incredible concert is not lost on him. He may not be able to kind of specify exactly why in the same way that I can, but the magic is exactly the same, and he can sit there and go, that was an
awesome.
exceptional thing. And I don't think that we necessarily give audiences enough credit in terms of the fact that actually you don't have to have a ton of knowledge to feel that the thing that is felt.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Yeah.
That's just my thoughts on
no, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But and I think so. What do you think then? So, what's your experience of the way live music is coming back?
Slowly.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, that's an obvious. Although maybe that's not quite true. I mean, what I'm seeing right now is I see some people, and I mean individuals and companies, being quite busy, and that's really good. And so it's like live music is It's really difficult because I think, like, I've been inside rehearsal venues, and I've already been playing with others, safely, and all of that, and I've performed inverted commas concert, which was recorded for an audience to be streamed at a later date, and that felt fine, borderline amazing for me, to have my first sort of experience after all that time. But to have the lack, obviously, it's the cliche thing to say, obviously the lack of the live audience is the major weird factor. But there was still something good in getting dressed up in concert gear, and there was a little bit of sense of performance. I would say about 25% sense of performance that evening. And some orchestras are continuing that way, and that's fantastic. And some are not, because like mine are not because the profit model is, there's sort of no money to be made, and it's not necessarily about making tons and tons of money. Like, it's
We have
about
to make some money though, don't we?
spending all the money that
Yeah.
we don't have, and that's essentially what. Not everybody can afford to stream concerts online for free. That's really difficult for most arts organizations when they're seeing other people doing it for free. So so live music sort of going ahead, I mean, it's good. I'm seeing it happen. I was playing at a trio outside Wembley Stadium the other day, and where people walking past and are appreciating it, and that's nice. So but I mean, it's just small pockets of things, I think. And this business is a really large patchwork of amazing different things going on all at the one time. And when I first moved to London, I was overwhelmed by what to go and see on any given night, because I was thinking I'd never had all of this music at my fingertips before. I need to go and see it all, and first of all, it was quite expensive, and second of all, I didn't have enough time, and I couldn't keep track of what was going on from day to night, and obviously that now has all gone. So that's weird, and it'll be interesting to see how fast it returns or not, and what sort of form it returns in. Because I'm not sure is the honest statement on that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear, thinking about an orchestra like the RPO, that the amount of money it costs to get all of those people in a space together performing needs a lot of people in a space together listening on that model to fund it, and neither of those things is easy or possible at all.
No,
at the moment,
no, absolutely.
Some people is possible, but not all the people.
Yes, absolutely, and the background planning that goes into that, and
well, that's it.
and
You can't
with
just fling
staff
it together,
that
can
are
you?
not working because they're on furlough, and you can't ask them to prepare for concerts because we can't afford to pay them right now, etc. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely tricky. More than tricky. That sounds
More
a bit
than tricky,
flippant.
yes. No, it's not flippant. It's very tricky. Yeah.
So tell me what it's been like teaching during lockdown.
Well, I've done a bit of teaching during lockdown. A couple of different things have been really interesting for me. First of all, as the contrabassoon teacher at the Royal Academy of Music, it's very difficult because, I mean, so the contrabassoon is quite an expensive instrument, so it's not really expected that students will own their own instruments unless they're, really excelling and are definitely going to pursue that. But even then, it's a massive financial block.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the big ones, isn't it?
Yeah. So that means that actually, it wasn't really possible for me to teach most of my RAM students over Zoom or whatever medium they prefer, because they don't have their own instruments. So a couple of them have, and I found a nice way to do that, but we didn't want to use up the live contact time too much, hoping that we could sort of bank the time. And the academy have to. I'm sure most institutions that work on that sort of with budgets, they have to clear up the budget, and so I had to be paid for the teaching that I didn't do, because it wasn't possible. But all that time will be owed. So I essentially sort of have written to all my students saying, essentially like this is an IOU lesson of 2.5 hours or whatever, because it's not principal study, it's related study. And the Academy were very much focusing on those lessons and related study who were in their final years to try and get them going, towards their final recitals. So, but we had contact with the students every week, which was really good. And that, I didn't claim for any of that because I think that contact time is really important. And we at the Academy had invited various guest bassoonists from all corners of the globe to come and speak to the students, on a very casual basis. So it wasn't like a sort of formal online masterclass or anything. But I was also asked to do some online classes, is not quite the right word. Workshops is a better word, for the National Children's Orchestra. So this year was going to be the first year that I was going to be a tutor for the National Children's Orchestra. So, of course, when, as ever, at the beginning of lockdown, we itched towards Easter course, which obviously was cancelled however many weeks before. I was increasingly nervous that I wouldn't get to tutor all those young bassoonists who were about to experience their very first Sorcerer's Apprentice, which I think is one of the most amazing pieces to play on the bassoon, because you were all in it together, and it's such a famous tune, and everybody knows the film, and it's it was such a
rite of passage.
Oh yeah, definitely, and so I think that when I was approached some weeks or months later, I don't know, by the NCO to then ask if I would be interested in, tutoring on their online summer course, I sort of jumped at the chance, mostly because I thought, well, we can still do something with the Sorcerer's Apprentice. I don't know, I haven't worked that out yet, but I was sort of desperate to try and think of something. So they were really good, and what was it was quite inspiring for me. I had to prepare, I had to prepare rehearsal videos, if you like, of me as if I were tutoring in a sectional, but of course it's me with this background and there's no bassoon students in front of me, kind of taking them through this piece and what they might find difficult. But of course there's nobody to respond to, so I don't know necessarily what they're going to find difficult. So I'd sort of take them through everything and try and not be too militant about it, because they're kind of there to have fun mostly. Of course it's an educational thing, but like kids, what we do is, at all levels, at all ends of this business, whether you're a kid or whether you're in a professional orchestra or string quartet or whatever, it's a very social sector. And that aspect of it is really important for children, and as well as students, as well as adults. And that's obviously what we've all been missing during lockdown, as well as the physically playing our instruments, is the interaction with each other, and that's really important. And it's really important for individuals' motivation. So what NCO also did was that they had those rehearsal videos which I prepared on my own before the course sort of opened, if you like, and they were all online for the children to use or watch, and stop and practice those bits or play along with me or whatever they wanted to do with them, and then record their piece. That was sort of already done, but we had live sessions which were just sort of social interaction, I sort of called it bassoon chats, because it was in the end I had 20 bassoonists from all over the UK, aged somewhere between 10 and 13, which was, and it was the largest number of instruments in the wind and brass. Like flutes weren't as many as that. It was really amazing. So they had to split them up into 3 groups for me, and they were all so much fun, and I really sort of still slightly brokenhearted that they haven't actually met each other in person. But children are so adaptable, and I think it was fine for them, and we chatted about what they love about the bassoon and what annoys them a bit, and actually it was hopefully nice for them to hear that the other kids, the other side of Wales, think that it's annoying that the bassoon's really heavy to carry to school as well. So they're not alone, because you might be the only person in school that is
I was going to
plays
say,
the bassoon
in any
or whatever.
individual area, having any more than 0 bassoons is highly desirable.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
not always possible, you know.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's amazing for me to have 20 of them.
I know, that's
You know,
just like,
yeah.
it was
And then
amazing.
we had that, and we did some stuff, and they asked me some, I played them some things, and and we talked about some weird techniques that they might hear about but don't really know. It's all about planting the seeds. And another freelance bassoonist, Connie Tanner, was she was taking the juniors of the NCO, and we had sort of planned these classes together. And I think we thought planting the seeds of those advanced techniques was a really important aspect of our little sort of our chats for them. And I just, yeah, I'm really looking forward to the day that we get into that hall and play some Sorcerer's Apprentice. Sorry, I was almost said Symphony Fantastic. It's because we did a bit of Symphony Fantastic as well. We were talking about that. Practice this at home. Let's try it. Play it along with me. And they were all on Zoom and they all muted themselves. They were playing along with me playing it. And so like on the screen, of course, you can't hear 20 bassoons all playing together. But although what we did was I unmuted them all, and mostly the chat worked quite easily. So anyway, that's sort of getting into technical details, which is not that necessary. But so I found myself doing that over summer, and the build up to that was really exciting and really good. And I realized that is actually something that I miss. I really enjoy teaching, the interaction of it as well. As I've said, it's not just the music making. The teaching, I enjoy that. The challenge, the brain challenge for me as the teacher or the professor or wherever I'm teaching, it's really important. Somebody's not quite understanding how to do it from what I've said. Well, I have to think of a better way to say it, or circumnavigate the problem for this person in a different way, because it might be something that I find quite easy or are more natural about. So I haven't thought about it hard enough. So I quite like the aspect of that aspect of teaching rather.
Yeah, and that's it. That brings me to something I made a quick note there when you were talking before, because something that I've heard of a few, not tons, but a few really interesting ways of continuing study online where
Right.
kind of online actual performance isn't particularly ideal, or certainly not for like long periods of time. And like, for example, a singer that I know organised an Italian workshop, and they didn't do any singing at all. They just worked on text in a way that you wouldn't usually do, but actually that's an incredibly good use of Zoom. And I was wondering, is this period teaching us, because I'm going to ask a long and roundabout question, but I'm wondering if this is teaching us things about how we can learn without necessarily practicing our instruments all the time. So I was just curious as to whether this is teaching us things about what parts of teaching are to do with playing instruments and what parts are to do with talking and reading, and do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I think that it's really important that the students, and I hope that, well, I would like to say I hope that all of my students, or all of the students, music students everywhere, have realised that when you turn up to a lesson, your lesson shouldn't be a practice session, a supervised practice session, which definitely some of my students are guilty of, and I going back to what I said before, helping them, teach themselves. I'm happy to sit there and sort of practice with them and try and show them ingenious ways to practice and things. And after the 10 minutes of doing that, it should be better. But actually, that definitely should be time. That to me is not contact time. Not good use of contact time is a better way to put it. And I would imagine that then some of the other students that I've seen over the last few years often come in, and they're after advice on this situation or that situation. That is, very valuable use of time. I think actually, and it's not necessarily always chargeable. I'm happy to receive a short phone call, and if there's something I need to answer quickly, then. But yeah, I think there's definitely. There are better uses for time than simply sort of practice sessions from a student's point of view, or from a teacher's point of view, from both, and utilising the lesson time. I think I'll like to think that most people after this will use it wisely. I certainly said to my pupils, or students rather, at the academy, they've please don't use your IOU lesson time, sort of willy-nilly. If you've got something you're preparing for an audition or something like that, that's when I think you'll get the most out of our time. When I'm giving you advice on it needs to be a bit faster, or no, that tempo's good, or that kind of thing. You're preparing at that level anyway, I think. So yeah, I definitely do think it will change the way that people approach the lessons. Certainly for the brighter students. I really hope that that's the case, because certainly in England, they're paying an awful lot of money to study at a higher institution. At school it might be a different scenario, but at higher education, it's an awful lot of money. So actually, perhaps they're seeing this. I certainly haven't seen over use of my time on Zoom or anything like that. It's always been very, very efficient when a student has wanted to have a lesson, which is good. I think they've always been very prepared. So yeah, it is very good.
It's often Zoom meetings and more kind of work world can be the kind of thing that you don't prepare for terribly.
Yeah, no.
And you don't travel anywhere. You just take all of that coefficient for. I had one the other day where this was, to be fair, not my fault, but because we're having some work done in our house, and the builder told me with 2 minutes to go there, he had to turn the power off. And I was like, I logged onto the meeting and said, "Oh no, a second, I just have to tell him not to."
Yes. That's good.
Yeah.
Whilst we're still on the subject of education, one of the things that I do with the orchestra is a lot of work in the community. I can't remember if I've said that already or not on our session so far, and that's something that the orchestra have managed to do already, is get a couple of community sessions going on online. So, and as you know, because you're up in Hull or near Hull, that I'm involved in the Strokestra project, which is based in Hull, in partnership between the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and I think Humberside NHS, the clinical stroke service. And we, in their very early sort of stages of lockdown, we had prepared a bit like the NCO practice sort of videos. Like, we'd prepared sort of material for them, a bit like a workshop that we would perhaps do. Of course, part of what makes that Strokestra project special is the chat at the beginning, as well as the music making. It's this personal interaction with people that makes people feel that we're not these horrible, or not horrible, that's not right, but we're not these sort of random outsiders that they don't have any sort of relationship with. So the chat is really important. So that's the difficult bit that's not there. But we did prepare videos for them. We haven't done a live session with them because that sort of the care home situation, for example, that we were working in is more difficult. But we have done children's sessions sort of on Zoom, where we have had 4 musicians in a room in London, and we've sort of been reading stories and asking children that are coming from different parts of London to tell us what to play, what animals to be in the story, and joining in with the story and that sort of thing. So, and I think that essentially it is really great, and it's why I'm in this business. I'm in this business. I love playing the bassoon, but I love sharing music with others. That's what this business means to me. What we do is very, very, very special, and no one can take that away. But when you share that with others, then that's the lockdown problem, and sort of circumnavigating the issue of how do we get this musical message out to others. Because when you're in a room with somebody making music, and it can be 100 people on stage playing the Rite of Spring, or 2 people playing Bartok violin duets, that atmosphere is amazing, and being part of it, and in a community setting, making people realize that they can be part of it too, is really, really special. I think that's where you sort of really hit into people's sort of the inner parts of their soul, I think, and they realize that you know, it doesn't matter if you don't like classical music. You can say whatever music you like. It doesn't really matter, but it's music making, and there's some intrinsic part of all of us um, is really locked into that music making, I think, and so bringing our music to people is that's it. That's what's missing right now a bit, but hopefully we'll get it back.
Oh yeah, so I have a general concern which has been around for a long time, way before COVID was ever thought of or
Yeah,
heard of, which is that audiences and musicians of the future aren't getting the musical experience that they need as children to really kind of become part of a thriving classical music community in the future. I think this is possibly something that's at least one or two generations away from, like, in the past, from the children that we have now, because I think
yeah,
you can see it in audiences for, you know, things like regional music clubs and things like that. They have a tendency to be older, they have a tendency to be middle class, and so on and so forth, and it does, in my opinion, entirely correlate with the educational opportunities, you know, because as a child of a musical family, I had a ton of exposure to music, and
yeah,
lo and behold, I work in music, you know, and I
yeah,
feel that it can be quite patchy. So I think that the work that the orchestras do in this is absolutely brilliant and essential, and the fact that the kind of way it works means that there's a lot of focus on trying to get it into communities where it might not otherwise be heard, is really important as well. I just sort of wanted to
yeah.
mention that and see what your view
No,
is on that.
I think that's really important, and I think that one of the things that the orchestras do when they visit is hopefully inspire and motivate kids to perhaps get involved in music, or kids who are involved in music already to, you know, sort of really practice and work towards something that they want or they see might be possible, like being in an orchestra or whatever. That's not necessarily the pinnacle goal, but to try and inspire people. But I think that the orchestra's visits and community work, as much as I know that every time we connect with a group, a community group, whether that be, you know, the stroke patients in Hull or prisoners in Wandsworth Prison or something like that, that we try and connect with people and leave them something. So rather than it be just a sort of wham bam visit, like I play the bassoon, this is how amazing it is, bye. We try and leave something, which is great. But I also think that what orchestras do in those situations is not necessarily a good enough. Well, it's definitely not a good enough. What's the right word? Replacement for grassroots musical education.
Oh, sure.
We
Yeah.
can't do that because it needs that's a
That's
regular
not
thing.
what it's for.
It's not what it's
That's not what
for.
these projects are for. Yeah, I
Exactly.
agree completely.
Yeah, so and I think
Yeah.
we can help those, and what orchestras and musical groups must do is find a way to work alongside um, community music groups and music teachers in schools, and communicate with them effectively and ask them what they want us to do. You know, so we're not just coming in stomping all over everything and just going, look how good we are by. Um, and sometimes, you know, you could get music teachers that are sort of tearing their hair out going, well, you know, it's all very well for them. You know, they just swan into this school, you know, and do a sort of half an hour workshop, work with the kids, and everybody wants to suddenly play the contrabassoon. That's not how necessarily life will be, you know, in a state school, wherever in the country.
Yeah,
You
you
know,
can't
I
just go
came.
to the contrabassoon cupboard and get one out to have a try, can you?
Yeah, not quite.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a part of the whole problem, or the sort of classical music business, which I'm very passionate about. I didn't come from a musical family at all, and I had free bassoon lessons at school. And I went to almost all the after school wind bands and orchestras, you know, at school level and at regional level. And it got to a point where there was then a sort of private youth orchestra, Edinburgh Youth Orchestra. Um, and I paid for those summer courses from my own pocket, just mine. You know, my parents didn't pay for them, and ended up going to music college. And of course, I was supported by my parents, but like the financial support wasn't like huge because they couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So it and now I'm in a music business surrounded by people who mostly went to specialist music school, and who are mostly from middle class families, um, and yeah, that's it's an argument that I sort of need to sit down and think a bit more about, actually, because I'm not very eloquent at talking about it, perhaps because I've spent so many years in these environments, slightly backing off chats about it because of a working class background, and wondering, where I fit into all of this, and perhaps I've tried to fit into it after a number of years, and perhaps, to everybody when I visit my area of Scotland, that everybody thinks, oh, he's a middle class idiot now, or whatever they think about how I speak, because it's definitely not how I used to speak. Because I've changed that in order to try and fit in, and I think that not you don't have to fit in, you don't have to change, but it's certainly an easier way to go about it in this business. And so I think, a bit like when I was saying about, we need to remember that it's always somebody's first time listening to Vorjak 9, or whatever popular music piece that musicians perhaps don't want to play again because we've played it a million times. We've we've yeah, we've got to always have our doors open, in this business, to audiences, as well as new people, new members of the community, at professional level, students, and not have any preconceived ideas, and try not let our preconceived ideas sort of affect, who we're coming into contact with. And one other thing I'd like to say, sort of before I sign off on that one, is that, if you're sitting listening to this thinking, I'm very open, I'm very inclusive, then actually I think you're probably not. I think if people that are, well, somebody once said to me when I was really, really, really worried about being in tune, or not in tune, people once said to me, sometimes people that are the most worried about being in tune are absolutely fine. And if you're not worried about being in tune, then you need to worry. So I think sometimes we all need to make sure that we're never being complacent about being inclusive, in any part, and I mean members of the orchestra, new members of the orchestra, or guests coming into the orchestra, as well as members of the audience, or people who walk past, and a trio playing outside Wembley, and just kind of go, well, what's that? And they just stick around for 5 minutes because they're kind of interested in what that weird long wooden instrument might be. And we just kind of try our best at all levels to be as inclusive as we can. And if you're thinking that you're definitely the most inclusive person, I'm pretty sure you're probably not.
Yeah, I feel there's some work to be done in the music industry in general to do with inclusivity on almost every level. But even without focusing on the really big issues like race and disability, even just within relatively average people's lives, the amount of money they make, the ability to do things like raise a family, or have caring responsibilities, or have anything else really going on in your life, as well as a freelance music career, is incredibly difficult and not very sympathetically received. The ability to navigate it whilst not having quite a lot of disposable income to do things like go on courses and do things that are good just for networking, that don't have like a sort of quantifiable outcome.
Absolutely.
That creates enormous inequality in the music industry, as you've described. And I think that there are people that kind of make it through those barriers into being professional musicians despite those things. And then obviously you find yourselves in a situation where you may be surrounded by people who aren't like that, and then you think, for each of those people who is there from a wealthy background, who's been able to afford all of the cost of training as a musician is enormous. It's absolutely
enormous. And the cost of like building up all of the equipment that I need behind me, for
Well,
example.
look at that. I mean,
to,
if you
to
cost up your background.
kind of to do my job, you know. And
Yeah.
yes, some of it's tax deductible, and some of it I've borrowed and been given, and some of it I've bought, and some of it I've like been gifted, and all that, you know. But I mean, it's now a useful skill that I have and that I put to sort of good use, and makes me a very sort of slow drip of income. But I think in all of that, essentially, there are people in our business that, and there are not very many of them, there are more now, that are challenging the ways that the classical music business runs. And I put my hand up and say that I'm not very good at doing that. I'm a very status quo person. I'm very afraid of change. I think I don't like new things necessarily, you know. But I think that we all need to make sure that even if we are like me, rather than being a person who's, you know, a pioneer in the change of the business, that we all remain open to listening to the people that are trying to bring about change. And this business. I mean, even one orchestra is like an oil tanker, you know, moving through a great ocean. You know, this is one of my favorite analogies about orchestras. And you really, like, if somebody, a new captain of the ship, was sort of landed by helicopter in the middle of a long journey, you know, and this sort of happened when we had a new managing director a few years ago. If that person were to come on board and immediately like go, no, this is the direction of the ship, and turn the wheel like that way, and then, you know, I mean, that ship would never ever, it would sink immediately.
Everyone would be flying
Yeah,
everywhere.
it'd be a disaster.
Yeah.
And so the whole point of what I'm trying to say is that this is a very slow to adjust business, and so it's difficult to bring about change. And what I would say to the people that are sort of trying to bring about change is to not give up with us, that are the slower people. Like, you know, I'm one. But this whole fleet of ships that are moving from one end of the ocean to the other, that like have to be steered very, very slowly, and the adjustment is so slow. But as long as that person, you know, when we reach the new part of the land, is waving that red flag, is still waving the red flag when we get there, then we won't lose the track of where we're going, if that essentially. And I think that's really important. I think we all need to remember where we're going, not be sort of too disillusioned by the path, even though it might be scary or whatever it might be. You know, you could apply this to kind of any walk of life, I suppose. But I think the classical music business is a very good example at this precise moment in time, because there is a new path that can be taken through all of this. And I mean, I'm scared to do something different with my life, really, you know, but I'm probably going to have to, in order to make a different income. That's a separate sort of personal issue, but So I've made that point, I think, haven't I?
Definitely. It's a great point. And I do love the analogy. I think I'm going to think of that one often.
Yes. I'm often told I bring up too many of those analogies.
I love it.
Stupid
And I was just
analogies about ships.
imagining what would happen without. I feel like this might end up a bit cheesy as a continuation of your analogy, but I'm just imagining what would happen if everyone on those ships like leaned in rather than leaning the other way.
Yeah.
You know, lead into the path of change. It could, you know, it could be really incredible. And I think a lot of people do. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I don't know. And also, I mean, but big change comes from adversity. You know, historically, this is a fact. And I mean, you
That's
talk about personal career changes. I mean, my personal career change happened when I had my son and realised what I was doing at the time didn't work anymore. And that was on a personal level. And now this is what's happening at the moment is happening on a global level.
Yeah.
So, you know, if ever there was a catalyst to kind of make the boat do that.
Absolutely. Maybe this is it, and it just takes faith, I think, and foresight to make sure, and for everybody that's sort of that is the leaders of that faith and foresight to not. Well, I mean, those people need support from all of us.
Yeah.
They really do. But those leaders, they need support in staying sort of steadfast, and all, to use all those sort of words you learnt in Sunday school and didn't really understand them, sort of thing. But yeah, it does need that, and it would be really interesting to see what happens. I don't, as I said before, I think I'm not a great person for change, so I don't naturally come up with exciting ideas for things to do, ways to take things forward. But I'll happily get behind people that do have the good ideas, because I think now is the time to do that. I think it's important for us to all have open ears, not be blinkered, in thinking we'll get back to this exactly as it was before. I mean, I still want to play the big symphonies in the big concert halls around the world.
And I think people will
of
still
course.
want that. Everyone still wants that to happen.
But but the makeup of it, the makeup of individual orchestras or companies, where the profit comes from, and a lot of orchestras were already starting to diversify their incomes before this, and individuals were too. So.
I wanted to ask you before, actually, and I forgot. Yeah. This might seem a bit minor in the context of what we've just been talking about, but do you think, in your experience of working in professional orchestras and working in the education department, in the education work that they do, are the people who play in the orchestras would you feel like they're getting more into doing that than they were before? Or do you think there have always been people in orchestras that are really keen to do really good education work like you are? Or is it a popular thing? Because I feel as though there's an impression in the industry that this is something that like the top flight professional musicians aren't keen on doing. But my personal experience is not that. My personal experience is that there are some absolutely incredible musicians that are really keen, like yourself, that are really keen on doing this kind of thing. So I'm just curious what your experience is.
I think it's quite a hot topic, actually. It's a hot topic that's not very it's a hidden topic within an orchestra, kind of for example. Yeah. I think there are I mean, so before COVID, my orchestra is extremely busy, has an extremely busy schedule. So there are some people that don't have the time to do it, and some people that would not rather take off a couple of concerts to do education. Mostly, I think it's not generally because they think it's rubbish, or they think it's not of any value. I think it's mostly actually because they just think it's not their thing, or they're not very comfortable in that environment. Because there's a definite stigma about within certainly orchestral musicians of I don't, that's not me. I don't have the skills to do that. I feel very comfortable in an education sort of setting, and sort of launched myself straight into it, because as being the contrabassoon player, I was less busy than everybody else in the orchestra, so I was more available to do those projects. But I also loved it, so whenever there was a project that clashed with something, I would invariably not appear on stage and be doing this community project elsewhere. So yeah, it's difficult. I think it's not for everybody, but certainly orchestras, I mean, my orchestra offer training sessions, and actually they've offered some training sessions to some small numbers of people whilst we've been in this time, in this time, in inverted commas, whilst we've been off not doing anything. The education department have taken this opportunity whilst they've got their musicians to sort of invite people to come in and do training, to sit down and talk about what will happen in a workshop, what to expect, what not to expect, what will be expected of you. Like some people are really feared of improvisation and that kind of thing, of being asked to play on the spot, and that's a lot of people, that's vastly out of their comfort zone. And I was invited along to a couple of those sessions in order to sort of talk to my colleagues about the work that we do, not just what I do, and how what is not what is acceptable, what is expected, and what to expect, and also about the fact that when I started, I made it known to our head of education that I have a significant issue with working with adults in that context, and she made a significant effort, put a significant effort into put me only on adult projects, in order to to sort of aid my sort of professional development, if you like, and it really worked, and that's why I'm involved in the Stroke project in Hull, because I essentially had a sort of issue with patronage. That's a side issue, but a sort of issue with the line between teaching and or educating and sort of patronizing people, and I think I'm more aware of where that line is with children and younger people, and less aware whether it is with adults. So I mean, that's an education, another subject, but I think in the context of that work, there is an increasing need for it, and there's an increasing awareness within the musicians. I think of the need for that to connect with audiences in different ways, and sometimes some of the best projects we've done are a small number of people working with kids, let's say in the run up to a concert, and the kids are involved in the running of the concert, sort of however many months down the line. This was a project done in partnership between the RPO and Orchestras Live, which is one of the best projects I think I've ever been involved with. And the kids essentially design the concerts. They choose the music, and aside from actually conducting the orchestra, they're pretty much doing everything else. They take on all the background roles of the orchestra manager, and they're helping put music out, they're helping the librarian, they're operating cameras and selling tickets at the front, and etc, etc. They get a full spectrum. So I think it was Orchestras Live's idea. It is amazing. It was amazing. We did one in Hull, in fact. Yeah, we did them in, it was Orchestras Live, sort of the idea of not just giving them an insight into how a professional orchestra works, but all the other jobs that go around, like in the arts, because it's not everybody that is inspired by a flute player that comes to school can be that flute player. So but you can be inspired, and actually a lot of them were like, actually I really like the role of the orchestra manager, where you get to boss all the musicians around and all that sort of thing. But the point of telling you about that was that, so that was a very sort of specific bunch of musicians, me and my colleagues, who are used to working these projects and enjoy it and do a lot of it, and who are perhaps more free, and every time we sort of revisited the kids, there were more and more, until eventually they were working with a full orchestra. And of course they don't get to meet the entire orchestra individually, but the whole orchestra is involved in this project, and they all my colleagues have to buy into it. And from the minute they sit down, that some of the grumpier members of the orchestra, I could see them thinking, oh, this is not, what is this? But actually 5 minutes in, the kids are running the show, and the show is being put on for kids, so it's their peers. This is all being set up for. And I quick look around the orchestra in the middle of the concert. Almost every musician is bought into that. Really, they all did, and they all see the value of it, and will tell you about as enthusiastically as I have about those projects. We did them all over. We've done them with Carlisle, Doncaster, Sunderland, Hull, Lowestoft, sort of quieter cultural parts of the country, one might say. So I think that the orchestra, it was really heartening for me to see my colleagues all buy into that fully, and so I think they all appreciate this other arm, the orchestra, and it's an arm that increasingly is more important, that if you cut it off, the orchestra would struggle to survive. It's more of a leg now, I suppose.
I'm quite intimidated by kids, especially groups of kids.
Right.
Because they're terrifying, aren't they? And
no, I don't think so. I think groups of adults can be terrifying, but I think essentially what we're talking about here, we're talking about communication, and perhaps it's just my slight nervous or shyness about communicating fully with adults, where I think children are like sponges, and it's no skin off their nose if you tell them something they've already heard before. It doesn't matter. Or if you tell them something like planting the seeds of about the technique to the NCO bassoons, the planting the seeds of very, very, very advanced technique. Some of them will retain that, some of them will do something about it, and some of them will forget it instantly, and that's all fine. But with adults, like some of them are sponges, some of them are sponges that are full, some of them are sponges that do not want to take on any water, like absolutely do not give me any water. Some of them will reject you because you've told them something that they know, or yeah. So I think that all the hang-ups that adults have, I don't know. If you've got a classroom or a group of totally receptive adults, then fine. Yeah. I think one of the things I've has really helped me has been observing workshop leaders working with groups of adults, and how they deal with it. I mean, it's not a stupid thing to say. It's a slightly obvious thing to say, but we learn from watching other people, and there's just this sort of sheer explanation, and there's no sort of apology for dumbing down some information for adults, because not everybody will have heard it the first time they've said it, or I'm just going to tell you this again, it's absolutely fine, blah blah blah, and that sort of has made me very much more comfortable in working with adults, which is good. I still feel more natural in an environment with children or students perhaps, but I don't know. Maybe that's just because I'm a big kid myself. I relate to that more. I don't know.
I think I've retained from childhood a fear of saying something and everyone just looking at me like, what?
Yeah. Well, I definitely have that.
And kids are more likely to do that than adults with me, maybe.
Oh, really? Oh, I don't know. I definitely the other way around. Well, maybe it's just I feel more inhibited with the adults. Some funny. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we need people who like different things, don't we? Otherwise,
that's very true.
Anything.
It would be boring otherwise.
It would indeed. Oh, it's been lovely to talk about this.
Yes, I totally agree. It's good.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on today, Fraser. It was lovely to chat.
You're very welcome. It's very nice to chat. Thank you. Thanks to everybody that's been listening.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening today. To find out what we're up to, do join our mailing list or follow us on social media. And if you'd like to support the podcast by buying me a coffee, you can do that on buymeacoffee.com. Thank you so much. See you next time.